This is my lab, ceramics Swiss dental lab. And we're in Portland, Oregon. We're like 10 minutes outside of Portland. And I have a trading company called Alliance Trading, where we have videos and we do like one-on-one web training on basically all this full arch stuff. So OPTISPLINT, digital design, bar design, guided surgery. We have all that. And then Digital Arches has been great with us and actually really changed our full arch business. And so I'm going to do something a little bit different. I think that would be a disservice to you if I didn't talk about the business aspect of how OPTISPLINT affected our lab. The parts and pieces of it are actually super simple. Those of you that have used it, it's not complicated to put things together. But the question is, what's the logic of using it? What's the rationale in using it, especially in today's market where we have grammetry like OPTISPLINT? There's all these like grammetry systems coming out. There's like Nexus and all these like quote unquote like photogrammetry systems, and there's photogrammetry, and then there's grammetry. So then how do all those things fit in the marketplace and in your business? So I'm gonna start and do a business review, and the research shows that if I show you slides, you only retain about 5% of that, so pretty low percentage. And so what I'm gonna do is for the first 30 minutes or so, when I go through the business part numbers, I'm gonna do it live. We're gonna do live notes. And the literature shows that you actually will retain about 20% of that. And it's a little bit more challenging to do, but it's more fluid. And so if you have questions, feel free to, it's a pretty small group, so feel free to just ask questions. And I'm not here to sell anything. I'm gonna talk about what I do in my lab every day. And again, we only do basically full arch and full arch guided surgery. That's pretty much it. When I took over the lab, it was my wife's parents' lab, and they were like a small crown and bridge lab. And then we took it over, and then we became like a full service lab. So removable, crown and bridge, implant support, prosthetics. And then the pandemic came, and then I realized that there's a lot of stuff that I didn't like to do in the lab. So for instance, I got sick of doing like a number 19 crown. Like people call like bitching about number 19 crown, like that got super old. There were also people in the lab that were toxic that I didn't really like working with. So we're like, okay, we're gonna shut down for 3 months, and then we're just gonna do what we love to do, which is full arch. And so we went from like a 25-person lab down to about a 4 or 5-person lab. And initially it was super hard because obviously coming out of the pandemic, like no one was doing full arch, right? And it took us about 4 years to get to where we are today, which I'll share with you. Does everyone know what photogrammetry is in this room? Okay, and grammetry, because most of you guys are using it already. So what I'll do is I'll skip and I'll go into this, and this is called the circle of competence, and this is from Warren Buffett and Charlie Munger. And essentially what they say is that from like an investment point of view, if you stay within here, right, within your circle of competence, then you're going to have a really high success rate. And as soon as you go outside of that, then your success rate drops. And so as long as you know, like, hey, when I go, like, my step outside of this, I'm going to potentially take some losses. Like, that's okay. As long as you have awareness that that's going to happen. So my circle of competence is literally just full arch. So every day, that's all we do. We don't do no removable, no credit bridge, no single unit implants, just full arch fixed implant supported cases. So our lab is basically this. And what I do is I primarily do CAD/CAM. So I design all the cases. I do all the guided surgery. I can stack cases. So I can do everything from A to Z. And I stack probably less than 4 cases a month just to keep my hands wet. But for me, I'm primarily CAD and then design. And then Cassie's an admin person. And then she's also my lab manager. And she can also finish temps. So anything that we do as a surgical temp, so whether we mill or bring PMA, Cassie can do those. Mel is our porcelain person. So she'll stack porcelain. So she'll see contour finished cases. And then that's just my wife. And then she just pretty much does payroll and then pays bills. And then she's only there like 2 days a week. So this is our team. And we've had this team for literally coming out of the pandemic. So it's been about almost going into 5 years. And so with this team, right? So with this amount of people, last year, our gross was about 1.9 with basically 4 people. And in terms of zirconia, and I'm using the numbers just for like scaling purposes. And so for final zirconia, about 80% of the cases that we do are with tie bases. And so for final zirconia, last year, our final zirconia cases, we billed out about 1.4. In terms of temporaries, so these are cases where we scan and then we print our mill and deliver next day. Those were about 315K. And then guides, and these are full arch stackable guides, was about 200K. So that's sort of what we do. And this year, we'll do about the same. We had a slower summer. And so in terms of pricing, because all this, like, you have to know all this information to decide, okay, well, does OPTISPLINT fit in my workflow? Does photogrammetry, like, how to do all these things relate? We charge, and this is in Oregon, we charge $1,750 for a temporary. So if someone scans a case with OPTISPLINT, and then we deliver, usually with tie bases, that's what we charge, global fee full arch, per arch. So whether it's 4 or 6, or whether if it's the FP1 that has 6 or 8, we charge the same. PMA with a tie bar, that's like a long-term solutional. So PMA over titanium, we charge this. And then mono zirconia, and these are all with tie bases. This is 5750, and the zirconia with tie bar, with titanium bar, we charge 7,500 for that. And so my core product is this. And so this, in my pricing, exists as an anchor, because really I want to do mostly these, but what the anchor does is, like, when people look at a price list, they'll say, oh, okay, well, zirconia tie bar, it's 7,500, and then look at the mono, I'm like, oh, 5,750. It provides some perspective on the price. So they're just saying, the best way to sell a $5,000 watch is to put it next to a $10,000 watch, right? So this serves as an anchor, because really I want to do most of these, and then 80% of the time I'm doing that. The only time I do use a zirconia with tie bar would be if it's a case where I have more than one tooth cantilever, or I have limited restorative space, or if it's a zygoma case, or if it's a pterygoid case. All those, usually I do a tie bar for those. But everything else, everything that has 15 millimeters restorative space, has less than 1 molar cantilever, those are going to be zirconia. Yeah, of course, yeah. All in. Same. Yeah, but I would say 90% of our, so I don't, at least on the West Coast, we don't do a lot of FP1s. We don't. And we have, in my territory, I have a Clear Choice and I have a Nuvia. And so most of our surgeons are keen to do less than 6 implants, right? If you look at the literature, there's a survival rate difference between 4 to 6 implants. So 80% of my cases, 80 to 90% of my cases have 4 or 5 implants. Yeah. All in. So we make it super simple, because most of my, we work with, it's inside of our phone network, right? I don't need to work with GPs because my pricing automatically filters them out. Like, I'm too expensive to work with like a super GP. So what happens is I work with surgeons primarily, and the surgeons are the ones that advertise us to their referrals. And it's super easy to say, hey, work with Charles. This is the price, and the price is the price. And then the dentist knows how to bill out for that. Right? Makes sense? Yeah. Okay. So in terms of scaling, right? So if XYZ is my team and our technology and our mills, whatever, right? Let's say, just for math purposes, right? Let's say we're doing 2 million. So I'm just rounding 1.9 up to 2 million. So the question is, okay, if I take this whole thing and I multiply it by 5, right? So if I have 5 times the staff, 5 times the technology, 5 times the mill, then this turn to 10 million. In my opinion, No, I don't think full arch is scalable like this, because all of this is super limited, right? We don't have skilled technicians that we can just find out of nowhere. You can just pop it in with no training that can design full arch cases, see contour finish. Then like those people don't exist, and they're becoming less and less, right? So if we look at a graph, so this is time, and then this is the amount of people, right? So then this is skill. So in our lab industry, like this is what's happening. Like 60% or 70% of technicians are approaching the age of 60. So our skilled labor is going way down. And at the same time, we have an inverse curve, and these are kids that don't know what Craigslist is. Like, or something crazy, right? Like, anyone that hires people knows that it's a different generation of people. And so this is the challenge. This is why I don't think full arch is scalable. And so therefore, you have to be even more efficient and judicious with your time, because we're not going to find people that can come and replace what we do. That's really the primary problem. And so what we found is in our lab, we charge out about 20 arches a month. Those are finals. And so it takes about 60 cases in the lab to build out 20. And those 60 are in some phase, whether like we're designing a temporary or a prototype, whether they have a prototype and wait for it to come back. We have 60 that are in some phase, and usually every month, 1/3 of those goes to finish to build out. So a very easy metric is that per month, I have to basically build out 20 arches. Okay, and then so that means per day, in my lab, we work Monday through Thursday. We work 4-day weeks with 4 10s. So we have Friday off. So we have to do about 1 to 2 arches per day, which is not that bad when you think about it. If you look at that simple metric, if you can finish 1 to 2 arches per day, if you can finish 1 surgical temporary per day, then you're going to do $2 million per year. Like that's really those are the metrics. Super, super easy. So then the question is, okay, if that is my metric that I got to hit to do 2 million, what's preventing me from hitting that metric, right? One of the things that are in my lab, whether it's inside factors, outside factors, what are the things that are preventing me from doing 1 or 2 arches per day? And so what we have to look at is problems versus opportunities. And I think as an entrepreneur, how many of you guys own your lab? Yeah, okay. So you know that as an entrepreneur, as a business owner, like it's your job to be opportunistic and optimistic, right? You have to say, hey, you know what? These are the next steps, and you have to have some confidence that those things are going to work. The problem is, or the challenge is, which things are opportunities and which things are problems. And so problems, or these are the traits of problems, are that when you encounter a problem, it's usually not fun. It's not a fun thing to talk about. It's usually pretty painful. There's usually a lot of feelings around it. And it's usually not a simple thing. It's usually very complicated. So it takes time to solve that problem. And then the most difficult thing is those problems have usually existed in your lab for quite a long time. And so what you're actually doing is you're breaking habits. And that's hard to do because it's something that you have, maybe you've been doing it for 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 10 years. And then all of a sudden, you're like, hey, like, how do I get out of this thing? So those are problems. And then these are opportunities. So opportunities are shiny, right? They're shiny. They're sexy. They're fun. And they're new. And so when you see something as a business owner, maybe you're a lab manager or whatever, you have to determine, okay, the thing I'm seeing, is it going to solve my problem, or is it simply an opportunity? Because what happens is that if you have problems that exist in your lab, and then you take on a new opportunity, what you're doing is you're keeping your old problems, and those opportunities bring in new. So now you've got old problems and new problems. So what this is if you have unsolved problems in your lab, that is simply a distraction. And then you're just wasting your time, right? So what happens is if you have, let's say you have 3 problems in your lab, if you solve all those problems, you're going to win by default. And the definition of winning is what? Well, let's say you want to get healthy. Like the definition, you can win at getting healthy, right? If you want to like have more time, right? If you want to have more fun day to day, you can win at having more fun. You simply staring in the game is winning. So in business, if you solve your problems, you're going to win by simply staying in the game. And for us, all the people here that are small businesses, we simply have to outlast. That needs to be our long-term goal. Is like, okay, there's all this PE coming in. There's conglomeration of smaller labs. All I have to do is I need to outlast this movement. And then the top 2% of people that want to use small labs, that appreciate the personal attention and like craftsmanship, those people are going to get, and you're going to win by default. So your long-term goal needs to be, you know what? Yes, I'm going to grow every year, but I simply need to just outlast and just survive. So the question is, okay, well, wow, okay, we have problems, we have opportunities. How do we find solutions? Like, how do we find things that are solve our problems? And our reptile brains are much easier at finding problems and solutions. So here's an example. Okay, can I ask you a question? Can you name one thing that you have gratitude for? Okay. Yeah. 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 What do you have? What are the problems that you encounter on your day-to-day life? Yeah. 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 Can we get her a Stanley Cup? Thank you. So was it easier for you to find problems or to find things that you have gratitude for?
It's way easier
Way easier
to find problems.
to find problems, right? So our brains are meant for survival. And so we have a much easier time finding problems than solutions. So what we need to do is, let's take that innate ability to find problems and then swap it. So let's find the problems. And then if we find all the problems, then we can find solutions. So Charlie Munger, again, Warren Buffett and Munger, he has a strategy called inverse. And so what you do is, if you don't know what to do, think of all the problems that thing has, and then you just inverse those problems. Okay. So an exercise would be for full arch. What are problems that you encounter in full arch? Anyone? If you think of imagining a business and imagine the worst possible full arch business you could have when that's scaling, what are the things that business does? You waste time. What? Yeah. Breakage, fracture, verification. Yeah. Incorrect planning. Yeah. These are so in my mind, if I close my eyes, I think about, okay, if I think of my business as the worst possible full arch business, what are the things that are preventing me from succeeding? And for me, it's these things. So I waste time, basically. So I'm not productive. And that could be because I'm at surgery, I'm doing conversions, I'm doing something else, right? I can't acquire new customers. Very difficult, whether because I don't have a marketing budget, because I don't have the daily bandwidth to do those things. I don't have some sort of vehicle to acquire new customers. My profit margin is too low, and it could be because of efficiencies. It could be because of the way that our personnel works. And then we have no systems and protocols. So if I have one customer in New Jersey, I have one customer in Oregon, they're doing things differently, right? And so Charlie Munger says, okay, all you have to do to make a plan of how to succeed is inverse all these things. So instead of wasting time, we be more efficient, right? If you're wasting time at a conversion, don't do conversions. If you can't acquire new customers, open up your geographical territory, like make it easier for you to receive new customers. If you have a low profit margin, well, increase your profit margin, be more efficient. If you have no systems and protocol, create systems and protocols. And so as a business owner, which some of you guys are, have any of you broken down what your hourly value is. Meaning, if I say, hey, I'll pay you this amount of money for every hour you work today, like what's that number? Does anyone know? Have you like calculated what that number is? Well, I'll tell you what mine is. And then if you want to know, there's a website called clearthinking.org. And then what they have is they have a calculator. And what that calculator does, it asks you questions. It'll ask you, how much money do you make now? How much money do you want to make? And it will also ask you questions that make you think about the value of your time. So for instance, they'll ask you, if you're standing in line for an hour, how much would you pay to go to the front of the line? If you're going to travel from New York to DC and a plane ticket costs X and a train ticket costs X, how much more would you pay for the plane ticket? So it's making you quantify the value of your time. And so for me, the value of every hour is $375 per hour. That's what it comes down to. So it's a combination of what I make now. It's a combination of what I want to make. It's a combination of how much I value my time. And so if you don't, as a business owner, if you don't know what your time is worth, then you don't know when to say no to things. So for instance, if someone calls and you're like, hey, Charles, I've had a patient, they need an S6 and it's due tomorrow. Well, okay, I'm not charging that, so I'm not doing that. So I'm not doing anything in my lab where I make less than that. And so we have that same metric for every person in our lab. You know, what's their hourly, what should they be doing? And so they can think, hey, I know I need to make this per hour. Is it worth my time to be doing this? And you got to know that, because if you don't know that, then you can't do any of the metrics that we're going to go through. So find your problems, focus on problems, not opportunities, and then inverse them to solve them, right? Pretty simple. So this is a mind map. And what a mind map is, it's a diagram that is supposed to be the best way for you to learn. So for instance, if I had a bunch of slides and each slide just had lists and pictures and things, I'm basically expecting you to take information that you've never seen before and then synthesize it and remember it, which is really hard to do. So instead, I'm going to reorganize it for you so it's meant to be simple and easy to follow. And so if I look at a surgical temporary, okay, so that means a case where I am going to, either the dentist or the surgeon is going to scan the case, and I'm going to either design a prototype that they're going to print, or I'm going to fabricate something that we deliver that day or the next day. That's a surgical temporary, right? How do these three modalities compare in terms of timing, pricing, startup costs, all those things? So analog, right? In terms of analog, your startup cost unnecessarily is basically zero, because you got a denture, you go in there, they're paying for components, it's basically just your labor. So there's no, I mean, you can bring a hand piece or whatever, but startup costs for analog, and analog conversions basically minimal. We just totally ignore that, right? So for photogrammetry, I'm going to say it's between 30 to 45K. And just to be clear, I've been doing an OPTISPLINT for 3 years, and I also have an iCam, which I've had for 6 months. And so all this information is stuff that I basically lived through. So there are different types of scanners. So let's just say as a range, 30 to 45. OPTISPLINT, just for math purposes, I'll say if you have a single large case for 4 implants, we'll just call it 250 for an OPTISPLINT per case, right? Okay. So analog, if I'm doing an analog conversion, how many of you guys are doing analog conversions? Okay. How many can you do in a day? Yeah, two at most. At most, right? So 1 to 2 per day. Photogrammetry. How many people have scanners here? You do. How many cases do you scan a day? On average? 2, 3. Yeah, okay. 2, 3. 2, 3. OPTISPLINT. It's infinity, right? What's the limiting factor? The limiting factor is how many OPTISPLINTs I can buy, or realistically, it's actually how many surgeries that are going on. So whether it's 1, 2, 5, or 10 that are happening either in my territory or across the country, I have essentially infinity cases I could do. There's no limit, right? The limit actually is how many cases can I finish and ship, right? That's the actual limit, but for theoretical purposes, there's actually no limit to that. Analog, if I'm doing a conversion, I'm in the office. Okay, photogrammetry, same, we're in the office. OPTISPLINT, or am I? I'm in the lab. I'm not in the office. I'm in the lab. So it took us 3 years to take everyone. So in Portland, everyone was doing conversions, and 80% of the full arches were done by prosthetist. And all of them had the mindset that they thought, okay, patients need to leave with teeth today. That was their mindset. And so it took me 3 years to take all those people and then turn them to the OPTISPLINT without me. So in Portland now, I don't go to a single surgery, except for someone's doing their very first one, which at this point isn't really happening anymore. Everyone's trained to do it. So the surgeons, I send them to OPTISPLINTs. They all know how to do it. The staff still knows how to train those people. I don't go to any of those cases anymore. In terms of time, how long does it take you to do a conversion? Like the easiest one?
3 hours, 2 to 3 hours.
2 to 3 hours. Yeah, that's about right. 2 to 3 hours. Okay, so photogrammetry, it's kind of a timing issue, right? You can say, hey, surgeon, call me when the implants are going in, because I know that I need to scan this case before the flap closes, right? The scan might have to go on with an open flap. And so I would say, let's just call that an hour. Right, best case scenario, you get there, they're just putting on the multi-units and then you set it up and you scan, right? That's the best. In terms of actual scanning, once you get set up, how long is the actual photogrammetry scan? Yeah, can you give me a number? If I'm counting, including putting on the scan bodies, like let's say 4 implants.
4 implants per scan. So I didn't really use photogrammetry. I did digital scanning.
Okay. Yeah, but how? Yeah, similar.
Putting on 4 scan bodies.
Yeah.
And then doing the
Yeah.
scan. Usually like 10 minutes, 15 minutes max.
Yeah.
You know, a little high.
Yeah, so let's say we'll call it 10 minutes, right? That's safe. I would say for ICAM, for 4 implants, you get the scan bodies on, and it's a simple case. 6 to 10 minutes, right? OptiSplit. For those of you that have used OptiSplit, how long does it take for someone who's never used it before to assemble it and scan it? Anyone? I timed it, and it's 6 to 8 minutes. Okay, someone has a general dentist that has never used it before in their life can screw something on and leave it together in 6 to 8 minutes. Super easy, right? In terms of my time, so what's my time on these? So for me, it's $0 because I'm not at surgery, okay? So in an analog case, if we're doing 2 to 3 hours, that's that times 375. So let's just call it $1,200. Very, very difficult for me to charge enough to justify being at a case, right? Whether I'm actually doing a conversion or not, I can't make enough money to justify spending 3 hours at a case, because $1,200, that's just my overhead time. But in terms of opportunity cost, in 3 hours, I could have designed and milled 2 arches, right? So this is actually 10,000. Because that's my opportunity loss being at that case. Photogrammetry, I think this is probably super. It depends on where the office is, because you have to factor in travel time as well. But let's say it's an hour. Let's say it's close. You get there, you scan, you leave. I mean, best case it's an hour. That's still $4 of my time spent. So this is really what it comes down to. Is these are the 3 options. These are the limitations. And so how does this work with problems and opportunities? So what happened was, how many of you have been doing full arch for less than 3 years? So you want to be doing it longer than that. Okay. So this is the emotional cycle of change. And I will say that when we started in 2020, so we'll call this full arch. Okay, so we start here, which is uninformed optimism. And so when I got into it, I was like, okay, great. I can charge more for cases with less staff, and it's gonna be awesome. And then as time goes on, what happens is you go to the next stage, you do cases, and you get to what's called informed pessimism. And so what that means is now you know how much stuff can suck. And so what I realized was that, okay, today I spent 6 hours in a case, and I still have to go back to the lab and do 6 hours of work. That's what started happening. And then as time goes on, you don't identify, you don't solve that problem, and you get to hear, which is the value of despair. And what that is, it's like, hey, it's Thursday. I've done 4 conversions every day of this week. I haven't been in the lab all day. I'm going to be working all weekend. That's the value of despair. And what happens is, the way people get out of that is one of 2 ways. They either quit and then find something else, or in the case of conversions, what happens is you hire like 2 to 3 people, and then somehow you make it out. Like, those are the 2 ways that you typically will get out of it. And so what happens, what I see a lot, is that a lot of people are here. We are doing conversions, and there's a small business, they're trying to balance out their most important and the most valuable asset, which is time. And then what happens is something shiny comes, which is photogrammetry. And like, oh, cool, I'm down here. If I get an iCam or a PIC or a microamp or whatever, right, you start over. So you buy the scanner and you go back up here. And like, okay, great. Well, now I'm not going to do conversions. We're just going to be scanning. And then what happens is, as time goes on, you're scanning and you're like, okay, cool. Oh, I've got 3 cases today. Oh, they're at the same time. Oh yeah, like, what are we going to do then? And so now you're in the informed pessimism when you see the limitations of it. And then all of a sudden now you're like, okay, well, I'm going to grow my business, right? I'm going to go outside of my geographic territory. And then you end up back here, you're back in the valley of despair, right? And then until the next shiny thing happens, and then you go back, stage 1, you start all over again. Because you never identified what the problem was, you never fixed it. The reality is, photogrammetry or grammetry, there's no silver bullet. There's no cure-all that's going to make you money. And today, if you think that you're going to buy a scanner and it's going to make you exceptional, I think you're wrong. Because the definition of exceptional is that you're the exception, right? You're not doing things the typical way. You're actually atypical, you're unusual. If you're buying a scanner today, everyone has scanners, you're just like everyone else. Like, that does not give you any advantage. And so what usually is that it's not one silver bullet, it's usually 1,000 or 100 things that you do that actually will make you successful. It's not one thing. And so that's what happens, is that you never identify the old problem, and so you chase a shiny opportunity, and then you bring yourself new problems, is what happens. And so here's a prime example. Does anyone know the state? What state is this? Texas, yeah, Texas. So I was in Texas this week. I did a course in Dallas here on Wednesday. And then the Dallas course was for labs. And I was talking about basically this, OPTISPLINT. And then what happened was I was doing a program for a surgeon in a town called Odessa. Is anyone from Texas? No. Okay. I didn't realize how big Texas was. The time it took to drive from Dallas to Odessa is 6 hours. It's a long time. You know, it's funny, when we get to Texas, I was like, I had no idea it was 6 hours away. Once I would have just flown. But everyone was like, oh, like 6 hours is nothing. Because they're just used to like living in a giant state. And so what happened was, I was speaking for an orange surgery group in Odessa, and they had 3 locations. They have a location in Odessa. They have a location in this place called Lubbock, which is up here, and they have a location in a place called Midland. And it's a pretty big group. It's 6 to 7 surgeons, and they do a lot of full arch. And so I asked them, like, what do you guys do? And they're like, well, we do conversions. I was like, okay, like, where's your lab from? And he's like, well, okay, our lab is in this town called El Paso. And it's one guy, and he drives out here and he does conversions. I'm like, okay, well, how far is Odessa from El Paso? And they're like, it's 6 hours. I'm like, okay, well, like, what? That's gotta have some issues. Like, yeah, it sucks, because here he comes on certain weeks. He can only do a certain amount of cases a day. If our doctors need help with impressions or whatever, he can't come out with those. And so then I think, okay, well, that's the target, right? That's a prime target. You have a group of specialists that do a lot of full arch that have 0 support. Like I had no idea these places exist. So the question is, okay, how do we attack that? And so they said that there's a guy in Dallas who works for a big lab I'm not going to mention. And with this guy, he just came to town, and what he'll do, and he's here in Dallas, what he'll do is he'll come to Odessa, he'll bring a printer, he'll bring a photogrammetry scanner, and he'll design a case, and he'll charge you $8,000 for temp or $10,000 for temp, final scan, and travel. Okay, so the question is, okay, well, what's the difference between this guy and this guy? Nothing. There's no difference. They're both traveling 6 hours. They both can only do, let's call it 1 to 2 cases per day. There's actually no difference between these guys, right? They have the exact same limitation. And so the question is, okay, well then, how do you attack these people? And the answer is, well, you have to have something like OPTISPLINT. You have to have a remote solution that allows you to work with an office anywhere in the United States that has any scanner. So with OPTISPLINT, I can work with any state. They can have a Trace, a Prime Scan, a turnaround minute. It doesn't matter. The workflows are exactly the same. If I get a scan from anywhere in the country, if I get it by 1 p.m., they will have a temporary in their office by the next morning. Like, you need to have those systems. And if you don't have it, you're not going to be successful, because there's much larger labs that have way more money than you that will place people with these modalities that will make it seem super sexy. And you'll lose those 100% of the time. So this is how you grow your business, is that you have to go outside of your geography. You've probably already exhausted your current territory. You must move out. And the way you do it is you have to have a scalable solution for collecting records. That's what it comes down to. Any questions on that? Okay. So then there's 2 options, right? I have OPTISPLINT. I could buy them a scanner. That's an option. I could buy them a scanner. And so the question is, well, okay, what does that look like? Let me scroll down here. So we have this thing. It's called LTV versus CAC, okay? LTV stands for lifetime value of that customer. And then CAC is the cost to acquire that customer. So for instance, you could say, okay, well, I spent $500 on marketing, and it net me X amount of revenue per doctor, right? You could say something like that. And so the way it works is LTV is a ratio, right? It exists like this, LTV over CAC, and it's a ratio. So if your ratio is 1:1, that means that you spent $1 and you got $1 back. That's awful. You don't want that. For a small business, your ratio should be, so 1/1, that's bad, right? Bad. What you want is you want something to be 4:1 to at least 6:1. Like, those are the ratios you want to have success. So that means that for every $1 I spent, I'm getting, for every $1 that I spent, I'm getting $6 back. That's the ratio. And to give you some context, there's a company that you might have heard of. It's called Starbucks. Everyone heard of Starbucks, right? Their LTV to CAC ratio, the lifetime value of you every fall buying your pumpkin latte is $15,000 per year, and they only spend $10 to get the $15,000, right? That's Starbucks LTV. That's an amazing ratio. That's why they're so popular. That's why they're so successful. So the question is, okay, I'm in Oregon, and I want to talk this surgery group in Texas, and I'm like, okay, well, I'm going to buy them a scanner, let's say, right? What does that look like? Okay, LTV, and then I'm going to buy them, let's just say I'm going to spend $45,000, and then I'm going to buy them an ICAM. And let's say I want my ratio to be 6:1. So the question is, how much value must I get from that account to justify the cost of the scanner, right? And so let's say my lease, let's say it's 0% financing for 18 months, let's say, for the scanner. So my lifetime, let's call it 18 months, right? So simple math, that means that this account over the course of a year and a half has to do 270,000, or that's over 18 months, and that is equivalent to $15K per month. And that's, if you're doing finals, if you're charging $3,000, That's about 3 arches per month, right? If you get that, then you have a 6-to-1 ratio. It's not bad, and that's ICAM. So then the other question is, okay, well, instead of buying them an ICAM, what if I just bought them OptiSplints, which I do anyway? So my fees, actually, the fees I showed you include me buying OptiSplint. If they want to buy it themselves, I just credit it to them, just to make it super simple. So your question is, okay, well, if I want to get this certain lifetime value, okay, 270K, okay, and I buy them, so over the course of 18 months, that's 45 arches, and then let's say they're all 4 units at 250 for an OptiSplint. The question is, what's my ratio then? So certain lifetime value as the ICAM, and I'm just buying OptiSplint. What's that ratio? And that ratio is 24-to-1. So I've got warehouse capital investment, and I 4x'd my outcome there. That's huge. That's giant. I mean, that's, when we look at our problems, efficiency, leveraging, profit margins, like 4x'ing your LTV over CAC ratio will definitely blow those things out of the water. So then the question is, okay, well, that's cool. How do you put these things together? Because what you need to do in today's market is, like I mentioned, that's not good enough to say, oh, I use OptiSplint, or I use photogrammetry, or I have Shining 3D, whatever. It doesn't matter. What's your story, right? What's your mission statement? What's your story to clinicians to make them want to work with you? And so it's a very simple formula. And so if you don't have a story, right, here is your story formula. What you want is we call it plus plus. I stole this from a guy named Alex Hormozy. Plus plus, minus minus, and then friends, and then enemy. So if you have a story that encompasses these things, that's good. So plus plus means more of the good stuff. Minus minus, less of the bad stuff. And then you take those things and you frame it in the perspective of their friends, and then you frame it in the perspective of their enemies. So in this case, my story is that our digital workflow allows you to stay in safe chair time, and it keeps your referrals productive, right? Plus plus, more chair time, more productivity. It leads to less appointments for your referrals to go to final. So minus minus, less chair time. It will make your referrals more money per case. So fans, right? The surgeon, everyone has different things that drive them. And so for a specialist, we don't know if they're trying to make money on the case. It might be that they just want their referrals to be happy. Yeah, it might be that they just want the competitors to be upset. What can be one of those things? So in terms of enemies, I say, okay, well, competitive surgeons in your area will struggle to find similar partnerships. Because the nice thing is that if I work with someone here, I can say, hey, you know what? Within a 500-mile radius, I will give you this pricing that I will not give anyone else. So all of a sudden, you're able to give exclusivity to a territory that you could not do. I cannot do that in my own territory because there's 10 or 15 surgeons I work with. I can't pick one. As soon as I go outside of my state, I have the ability to give exclusivity. So that's our story. And if you don't have a story, you need to have a story. And this is a very simple formula to create that. Okay, and I'm going to move on. I'm going to go to, that's the business part. I'm going to move on to slides. Any questions on that, on the business stuff? Was that helpful at all? Okay, cool. All right, so we'll load up here. Okay. So what's the central problem for us for going from digital to making something? The central problem is this, is tie bases. And the issue isn't really tie bases themselves. If you look at the national average on survival rate on zirconia arch, double arch cases, it's about 98% over 10 years. And so that, and all of those 2% that fail, those are all almost tie-based debonding. So it's a very, very small amount. And I mean, how many of you experience tie-based debonding? Oh, okay. As a frequent, like more than 5 times a year? Oh, but that's different. Oh, that's different. Yeah, I mean, if I have a case where it's like a long cantilever, or yeah, I mean, like that's gonna happen. But in terms of like overall, if anyone does 100 arches a year, are you seeing more than like 10 cases where you have type A bonding? No, it's not a thing. In the literature, whatever, it's not a support thing. So the challenge is this, is that if I have a case, I do 100% digital, right? At the end of the day, I have to cement type bases in here. And so all of us are lab technicians here. We have type bases. We have cement gaps, right? Can someone tell me a cement gap that they use? 40 microns, right? Okay, yeah. So I'm about 50 microns. Is anyone less than that? That's about average. So this is a case, same case, and there's a tire base in here with an analog, and you're seeing a wiggle on this, and this is 50 microns. That's how much movement you get on 50 microns. That's a lot. So the chances of any of us in this room taking this case and freehand cementing with 6 tie bases and having that see passively is essentially zero, right? You may not actually be able to tell the passivity, and you might get lucky on cases, but at some point you get a case where the doctor goes in and he torques 1 to 15 units, and you get like ding, there's a fracture right through that zirconia, right? So this is the central problem, is basically this. And if you're doing this from ARCHTRACER or ARCHTRACER or whatever, and I don't have a model, this is before OPTISPLINT, well, the question is then like, how accurate is my model? And that's what I'm using to cement tie bases. And if I give the same STL file to everyone in this room of this model, are these ANRs going to fit the same? No, they're all going to fit different. We have different programs, different printers, different resins. We post-process us differently. Some of us never change our alcohol. All those things play a role in how the analog fits. And so that's the main constraint. That's the bottleneck. And so that's where photogrammetry came, and everyone has photogrammetry, so I'm not going to go into it. But the issue with this is that when photogrammetry came, there's no model. So you couldn't use tie bases. It's not possible. You can't possibly do it. And so they must come up with these screws, right? This one, I started using a rosette screw in 2018 when it first came out. And I was excited about it because I was like, hey, I don't have to spend money on tie bases, and I also don't have to cement tie bases, which is not super fun. What happened was there was a prosthodontist that wanted to use these screws. Has anyone used a rosette screw? You have? Okay. What color are the screws now? Do you know? Violet, blue, violet, yeah. Did you know that they didn't start that way?
They started yellow.
They were green. They were green. What happened was that I did these cases with a prosthodontist, and we did about 15 arches. And then I went to Lab Day Chicago, and he called me. He's like, Harry, I bought new screws, and they're a different color. I was like, oh, like what color are these? He's like, they're blue. I'm like, okay. And he's like, and they don't fit the same. I'm like, oh, that's weird. And so I go on the Rosen Screw website. I called Dan Rosen, and it goes to his like Facebook phone number or whatever. And I'm like, hey, like what's going on? Like you guys changed these screws. And so I'm talking to him, and I hear someone else talking, and he's sitting like 4 chairs down from me at Lab Day West. And so he comes over. I'm like, hey, like what happened? He said, well, these screws were fracturing at the neck. And so we totally changed the screw, and it should fit, but we're not sure. I'm like, dude, now I've got 15 cases in the wild that I can't get screws for anymore. These screws don't exist. Right, these are all the screws on the market. So there's a Vortex. That's the desk screw now, which is like that blue violet, right? This is the desk and the silver, and this is the Powerball. And the problem is that, and this is even more, so I've been saying this for like the last 3 years, is that none, except for desks, none of these screws are made by real companies. They're made by dudes or labs, right? And so if something happens, like if they get failures, if the FDA steps in, like what's going to happen to these screws? And by the way, except for desks and Rosen, like Powerball, Rosen screw, Vortex screw, they have their own drivers. They have their own proprietary drivers. So what happens is like, if I have these cases, if I use Vortex screw in 10 years, if they go out of business, like what's going to happen? I can't get screws, I can't get drivers. That's awful. And when you go on social media, this is the most common question is that, and this is on a Forge Facebook group. It's like, hey, what screw is everyone using? Because I'm using tie bases. No one even knows. Right? Everyone's got different preferences. And Adest just came out with their own screw now. The older one at least used an 050 hex. The new screw has a proprietary driver. And so now you're in a situation where, as of today, 2024, all of the major implant companies are working on their own screws. So within 6 months to a year, Straumann, Nobel, BioHorizons, they will have their own screws that go direct to the multi-unit. And so what's going to happen to all these screws? Like, there's no demand for them. They don't make anything else. They're all going to go away. And if you've done these cases in 10 years, you might be in a situation where you can't get these screws and you can't get these drivers. That's super scary, right? Just imagine you have 100 arches out there with a Vortex screw and your doctor calls you and says, hey, we can't get them anymore. Like, what's your warranty? Like, dude, I don't know. What do you do? No one knows. So I always go direct to tie base, or at the very least, I do a bar with an authentic screw. So for the Straumann case, and I need a cantilever, I'll do a bar with the Straumann screw, or I'll just use tie bases. Because again, like we all agreed, tie base debonding is not an epidemic, right? If you have passivity, if you use the right primer, if you cement things properly, you're not going to get tie base debonding, except for cases where we have like a weird cantilever or something like that's going to happen. Okay, and so Evan at OPTISPLINT, it is a scalable healing cap that is leadable together. So you get a verification jury and you're scaling a case all in one go. That's grammetry. This is a similar case that we did. This is what it looks like outside the mouth. We scan it in the mouth. And the nice thing is, again, like we mentioned, the bottleneck to doing a case of tie base is having a verified model of cement tie bases. And so what you do is you put the analogs on, now you got a verified cast. So in one appointment, you've got your models, you've got all your records, and you've got a verified jig and cast. And so we do what we call a digital conversion workflow. So as of today in Portland, I work with almost all the surgeons. We do 0 conversions, none. Everyone gets a next day temporary delivered by the dentist in the afternoon. So patients know that they're going to go home without teeth. No one gets upset. Everyone loves it because, number one, patients don't want to be in the chair for whatever 4 or 5, 6 hours. They don't want to be there. Here's a case, Pamela. That's a lower arch case. And this is the case we did guided in co-diagnostics. And so we designed a bone reduction guide. And then this is our takeoff, what we call takeoff position. So for every single case that we're going to do this for, we have a wax up ready to go. We have our antagonist that's already the same coordinate system. And in this case, we used our surgical guide as a reference marker. So for mandibular cases, I think using bone screws, even ARCHTRACER is very challenging to scan in the surgical field. I think very challenging to do. And so if you have a bone reduction guide, that helps. So what we do is we do surgery. This is all done in co-diagnostics. We plan the caries to extract. They do the reduction. They place the implants. They place the multi-units. And then with the flap open, you put on the OPTISPLINT scan bodies. And then in this case, we scanned it. I'll show you a different workflow, but in this particular case, we scanned it in the mouth. And then we scanned it and we capture the bone reduction guide with it. That's our registration point. So there's nothing more that surgeons hate than leaving teeth for a reduction. So meaning like if you're doing a mandibular case and you don't use like bone screws or some sort of registration screw, and you say, oh, hey, I leave these teeth in. Like surgeons hate that. So you don't do that. And so it's very simple. You just merge your scan body with your bone reduction to the bone reduction guide. And then all we do is we just add these positions to our temporary. That's it. This process is literally a 10-minute thing because this case already existed in exocad. All I did was I took that, I imported it as a scan body scan, I merged it to that, and I just added my tie bases. It's super easy. And so this was printed. This was on a Straumann printer with GC temp resin. And then she came back the following afternoon, and then we delivered the case. My bites right on. And so I didn't do a lot of these cases guided. You could also do them freehand. This was just with screws in the palate, but same thing. Your pre-op scan, screws in the palate, post-op scan, screws, ARCHTRACER, which is launching soon. It was nice because there's a lot of geometries on that, which makes it easy to like register things together. But this is at the end of the day, right? It's the same process. Once I get the scan to once this is printer milling, it's literally 10 minutes. It's not a long process. And so the advantages to a digital conversion are that it's stronger. So whether I'm milling it or printing it, I'm not like cutting holes in the denture. I don't get any fracture of the prosthesis. It's less chair time. There's an abbreviated restorative workflow. So usually from that temp to go to final, it's less steps. And then it allows for in-house fabrication. So if a stranger dentist has a printer, we just send them the file. So we call this 1, 2, sometimes 3 appointments to go to final, usually 2. And so this is Judith. And the plan was to do reduction, place implants, and give her the temporary the next day. We're going to use OPTISPLINT. Here's the same case I showed you. We pick it up, report model. We mill or crit our provisional. This one was actually milled. And then we cement tire bases on that model. And then she comes back, we deliver next day. So within 24 hours, she's got temporary, and she loved it. And so she goes with that temporary for, call it 3 months. And then implants heal. The surgeons release the case for restoration. And so what are the 2 things that change from surgery to time of restoration? The 2 things are number 1, occlusion, and then number 2, soft tissue morphology. Like that's it. And so when Judith comes back, she sees the dentist. The dentist will scan the temporary to capture all the occlusal changes. And then they remove the temporary to capture the tissue. And so what I do is I take, this is the design of my temporary. I merge the new temporary scan so they can see all the occlusal changes. So I can dial, so the occlusion is dialed in. And then we just make sure that the new design is nice and convex and intimate against the tissue. And so Judith comes back, and then we go over the final. So for Judith, think about it. She had surgery. The next day she had a temp. The dentist did 1 scan appointment, and then she had a final. So for the dentist, they had 2 appointments, including the final delivery, right? We could have done a prototype. If we did it, that would have been like the optional 3rd appointment. But the vast majority of our cases are 1 scan appointment and then final, which is probably very different from just like a conversion case or any other type of case. So Pamela, I just showed you this. What happened was her dentist had to go on medical leave. And so the surgeon was like, okay, well, I'll deliver the case. And when we delivered this, we did no occlusal adjustments, none. So all I did was we took our same design and then we just finished in zirconia. That was it. There was no scan. So Pamela came back. Her temp holds up well. And then we just duplicated this in zirconia, and then we delivered it. So for Pamela, she had surgery. The next day we delivered the temp, and then her 3rd appointment was deliver the final. That was it. This is on time basis. Yeah. Question.
Yeah. Quite often on the surgeries, the surgeon will choose not to torque to 35 to prevent spinning implants.
Yeah.
How do you account for that with that 2-step process?
Yeah, so in this case here, that could have been a problem. Every time I do angled abutments, you need to torque down the multi-units. Yeah, you're right, because what happens is if it's a 30-degree multi-unit, sometimes they'll torque it down. Even if they torque it down, they feel like it's 35, but it's hitting against bone, and then that bone remodels, and it leaves a gap, and then that multi-unit's like 1 or 2 threads. Yeah, so exactly. So what I would say, so what you can do is, I always give the dentist the OPTISPLINT or the surgeon, typically the surgeon, because if the surgeon does like an integration check, right, they remove the temporary, do the integration check, they torque it all down, I give them the OPTISPLINT from surgery and have them screw down and make sure it's passive. If it's not passive, you section either all of them or the one that you can tell. If one torques down and moves down, section that one and relieve it in the mouth. That's it.
Is it autoclavable? How does it?
The OPTISPLINT? Yeah, it's aluminum. But what we do is we do a cold sterilization. So we just soak it. We do the cold sterilization. Yeah. That's for the same patient. Yeah. Yeah, good question. Yeah. For the lower, I would not do this for the lower. I do it for the upper. For the lower, it doesn't matter because whether it's high water or not, it doesn't matter. For the wrapper, I would probably want to still do a tissue scan for that, right? Usually, I actually prefer to design more like kind of high water so there's room for hygiene. But for the wrapper, I would want to get a tissue scan to make sure that we nail that exactly. Yeah, good question. So, has anyone heard of Nuvia? No, so Nuvia, it's a full arch center, and it started, I think, in like Utah or like Arizona area. And what they do is they have surgery and they deliver final zirconia within 48 hours. That's what they do. And in Portland, I've got a Clear Choice 2 miles to the east, and I have a Nuvia that's opening 2 miles to the west. And it's a Lake Oswego. It's just 2 miles to the west of us. And basically, the job that they're looking for a surgeon, and actually this went up to $1 million. So now I'm in between Clear Choice and in between Nuvia. Clear Choice, right? It's a normal process. Surgery, temp, 2 or 3 months healing, and then restorative, final later. Nuvia, surgery, temp same day, final zirconia within 48 hours. So now I'm in this situation where there's all this marketing, right, going into this market, and then patients are saying, hey, like, I saw, they'll see like a prosthetist I work with, and they'll say, hey, I saw that this other place can do within 48 hours. Because remember, these patients are not patients that have been with a dentist for like 10 years. They're patients that have not seen a dentist, maybe ever. So they're a failing dentition, and they're financing this. They're like paying whatever, $500 a month for 7 years, like a car. And they're like, yeah, I want to get this done. Like, I never saw a dentist. I don't want to start seeing one. I just want to have nice teeth. Like, that's right or wrong. These are the people that are going to these places. And so we needed to find a way to do it. So I'll show you a couple cases. This is Gabriella. And Gabriella has a rare bone condition that only affects African-American females. And it makes their maxillary bone very, very soft, like super soft. On a CT scan, there's like these big bubbles where it's just black. Have you heard of this before? You've seen it, yeah. I've never heard of it. And so ortho is contraindicated because the bone's so soft. She didn't know. She had ortho, and all her teeth basically split out. So she's got all these diastemas. And so we can't place implants directly into her arch. We do zygomatic. So, and she's very, very dental phobic, high anxiety patient. And so for her, like, hey, like, let's do a final, let's get this done as soon as possible. And so she replaced 4 zygomatic implants, did an OPTISPLINT. She came back the next day, and I put in a printed temporary. And I'm using this to do 2 things. Number one, I look at aesthetics. We show near the midline. She had very little inside, so she wanted to show more teeth. And I also have just the occlusion. So I scanned that, take that back to lab, and then we saw her at like 7 in the morning, because the plan was that I was going to mill and sinter the zirconia that day, and the next morning was to stack the case. And we were going to see the next afternoon to deliver the temp for the final. But in Portland, we had like this big ice storm. And so there was like 3 to 4 days where we like couldn't go anywhere. Portland's not like here, like if there's a little bit of ice, like the whole place shuts down. We don't have any infrastructure. And so we just have a phase later, and then we delivered their temp. They're fine. That's a final zirconia delivered. So surgery, that temp appointment, and then went to final. And I'm not saying this is right or wrong, but what I'm saying is that you should be able to do it. At the very least, you should have the possibility to do it. And then it's up to the dentist to say, hey, yes, we can do this, and we will, or no, these are the reasons why I don't, but we do this instead. What is another one? Victoria, she had like this oral cancer. She had radiation, so her mouth opening was very, very small, very tight mouth opening. This is her smile design. So the prosthetist was like, hey, I don't want to do an OPTISPLINT because I don't know if I can get the scanner in there and get in there. And so we did this case in the hospital, and she was back in the hospital bed. And so he made a denture. He did the conversion. What happened was her mouth opening was so small, he couldn't tell like buccal where that incisal edge was. And then he totally just botched the conversion. And so she had seen me at the lab prior. She had my number. And then day of surgery, she sends me this text message. She was like, hey, it's a little toothy. Dr. Bruce said we could fix it. And I was like, oh boy, okay. And then the next message from her was this. So she's like, whatever you do, I just don't want it to look like this. I'm like, yeah, okay, like that's a pretty low bar. We can fix that. And so so this was on a Thursday. She saw Dr. Bray on Friday, and he was able to do the OPTISPLINT, scan it all, pick it up in the mouth. And then on Friday, I designed it, I milled it, we centered it over the weekend. I came in Monday morning, I stacked the case, and then this was her Monday evening with her final zirconia. And so the question is, I have more questions than answers. Like, this is not documented in all the literature. I don't know if, because I'm guessing as to where the tissue is going to be. So I don't know if your tissue recedes more than 2 millimeters. So you're that whistling, I'm going to have to redo it. I don't know, right? So I have more questions than answers, but you should be able to do this. Or else, yeah.
If you have to redo it
Yeah.
8 months from now, 6
Yeah.
months from now, when everything heals, right?
Yeah.
Whose cost is that?
So because it's an experiment with me and the prosthetist, I'm gonna eat it. I told him, hey, I don't know. I'm gonna see if I can do it and what that logistically looks like. And if it doesn't work, I'm gonna redo it. So I could do two things. I use structure high video in here. So I use high fusing structure. So one option is that if I had to do a correction, if it's a small amount, I could potentially do a correction bake with a low fusing structure, maybe, right? Or I would just remake it. But I don't really know. I did present to an oral surgery office in LA, and it's 7 surgeons with an in-house oral maxillofacial prosthetist. They do 200 arches a month, and they're doing their final zirconia within the same week. And so I asked him, okay, how often are you, because I had the same question, how often are you remaking an upper maxillary prosthesis because of tissue recession? And he says that they estimate when they build the final, they add an additional 2.5 millimeters on the intagular rail. And what they found is that less than 1% of cases that they do require a remake. So again, that's just a very anecdotal, right? There's no data on this stuff. But for me, whenever I do a maxillary case and I have a tissue scan, if I'm building 2 millimeters, I find that that's pretty conservative because the tissue will heal around that. But you get the unicorns, right? Where they recess 3-4 millimeters and then you're screwed. So I can't tell you either way. But it could be a situation where like you charge so much more for it where it doesn't matter, right? If you charge $3,000 for it next day, and then 1% of your cases you remake, it may not really matter at that point. I don't have enough data to tell you, but yeah, it's a concern. Yeah. So I'll finish with this, and then I'll do a quick demo if anyone wants to hang around. So Kimberly Schlamm, she's a prosthetist in bed, and her husband Mark is an oral surgeon. They're married, which is hilarious because when I go to the surgeries, Mark spent 5 years at Clear Choice, so he knows how to do full arch cases. And Kim's just like, she's on him, like he's doing this case, and he's putting the multi units, and she's like, yeah, like don't forget to torque the multi units. He's like, dude, like come on, you know. She's like just on him. It's pretty funny. And then Gaetano, is a super talented lab technician in Bend. So Bend is like 2.5 hours from 3 hours from Portland. It's a beautiful place. And so Kim across this patient Nicole, and Nicole obviously has VME, right, vertical maxillary access, pharyngeal dentition, upper lower arch, like totally bombed out teeth, and she could not afford to have upper lower hybrids done. And her dad was a veteran, and so Kim talked to Straumann, and we decided to do this case pro bono. So Straumann donated the implants. This was April of this year, and so Straumann and ICAM had just launched they're launching their distribution, and so they're launching ICAM. They're launching their new BLC implant, and so Straumann donated everything, and I donated the guides, and Gaetano was going to finish the case. And so we did a smile cloud. So we do a 2D smile design because you have to reduce bone, right? When you have that much excess maxillary tissue, but we have to reduce that. And so that was our design. And then we used the BLC implant, and ICAM was going to be there. And the Straumann had a film crew fly in because they were going to film the whole thing and make it like a big commercial. And I have 2 boys at home. They're ages 2 and 5. And what happens is that my 5-year-old will go to school, he'll get sick, he'll bring back some germs, and then him, my younger son, and my wife will all get sick, and they'll cycle the germs, and it'll get super strong, and then I'll get it, and I'll basically die. That's what happens every single time. And so we did this case in April on a Monday, and we're gonna bring the whole family. We're like, because Bend's it's like a vacation destination. So we're like, hey, bring the family. And then we got sick. And so this is Dean, Tuesday before we left. He's puking Tuesday, right? This is Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. So what happens is like he gets congested, he gets postnasal drip, he pukes, like we ball up and he pukes. So this is Friday before the surgery. The surgery's on Monday, and we're driving to Bend. So I know like I've got the clock's ticking for me, right? I'm getting dead soon. Yeah, I'm gonna be dead soon. And so I've been doing OPTISPLINT for a while at this point, and for me, what I realized was that there's a difficulty level of cases. So like a single arch maxillary case, fairly straightforward. A single arch on the lower, if a patient only has anterior teeth, I find those cases to be challenging because they don't have a posterior stop, right? The bite's usually not in subtricalation. And so I take that bite and I, with my temporary, they extract all teeth, the condyle seats into CR, and then I end up with an anterior open bite. That's the second hardest. And the most hardest cases are double arch cases that dial in the occlusion, right? How do I get the perfect occlusion that requires no adjustment? That's hard to do. And I was in Lab Dairy, Chicago this year. I came across these guys, and they're like, hey, like what we do is that we don't use registration points. We actually segment CT. So the idea is that if I take a post-op or pre-op CT, if the condyle is seated, right, I use the bone information as registration points. I don't have to use any registration markers. And so I'm a denturist in Oregon. And so I, as a denturist, right, if I have a patient that has no dentures, the way I establish a vertical and find CR is what's called Gothic arch tracing. If you guys have heard of Gothic arch tracing, which is basically this. You have wax ends, you have a strike plate, and then a pin. The patient goes through movements, and then there's an arrow, and the point of the arrow is CR. And it's like magic. It works 95% of the time. It's very, very predictable. And that's how we do it. And so the question was, okay, well, how do I do this for my digital conversions? And the seg marker thing like made sense, but I wanted to keep my OPTISPLINT workflow. So what I did was I printed, so I took my OPTISPLINT multi-unit healing cap, and then I scanned it, and then I used a Straumann screw. And I printed these out of a radiopaque resin, and on the top I milled those out of zirconia, because I wanted to figure out like which one was going to scan easier to like look more radiopaque. And so we go to Bend, and this is Monday morning. There's the film crew, and I'm always starting to feel a little feverish, right? I'm starting to go down. And I have not tested these markers before, and so, and by the way, we intubated her at 10 a.m. The case took 10 hours because the film crew like was making them go slow motion, so the case took forever. And so if they're doing this, I sneak in the back and I take my 2 radiopaque healing caps and I put it into my vestibule, and I CT scan myself. Okay, so there's to figure out, okay, which one's going to look better. And then what I found was that the printed one, which is the one on the right, had less scatter. It came out cleaner. And so I was like, okay, well, I'm gonna try this today. And so for Nicole, we put ARCHTRACERs into the palate. This is a pre-op scan, right? ARCHTRACERs into the palate. And then she had a very shallow vestibule. So usually I like to have at least a third ARCHTRACER screw into the vestibule. We couldn't do it because her vestibule was so shallow. And so we put them into the retromeria pad areas, and then we scan it out. So this is a pre-op scan. So the plan was that I was going to use these as registration markers, right, to merge everything together. And what happened was that we did the case. She comes out of surgery at about 8 p.m. And so the wheel her, I'm like, hey, like I want a post-op CT because as a backup, I'm like, hey, I'm going to try this workflow. And then so we take a post-op CT, and if you notice, she's got an open bite. And we did that on purpose because I need to be able to have these healing caps away from each other. I don't want them close. It doesn't have to be that much. We use a Pino bite block. That works fine. You can just also use like con rolls. And then what we did was we tried to do the ICAM scan. And what happened was that, and this, what I found out from iChem, this is like a famous story in their company now, is that every time they would scan, they would get half arch and then it would crash. They would get half arch, it would crash. And so they're calling Switzerland, they're calling, like, no one could figure it out. And the clone's intubated, right? And so what we found out was that the laptop they were using, the Dropbox was syncing to their corporate Dropbox. So it was literally downloading like terabytes of data and just like they had 0 RAM left. So the computer was like, the computer did not work. And so thank God we had backup OptiSplints. And so this was our tissue scan. And what we found was that, so we finished surgery at 8. Gaetano and I are at the lab because the plan was like, we're going to finish the temp that day. The next morning, we're going to do it with the film crews there. And so this is 9 o'clock at night. And then Gaetano's like, dude, we have a problem. I'm like, what's the problem? He's like, one of our ARCHTRACERs moved. So I've never seen that happen. I've never had one move before. But we had one. And then the problem was that we didn't get a great scan. There wasn't a lot of geometry left on that. And so I'm like, okay, let's try to use the one. And then he's like, we had another problem. I'm like, what? On the lower, right? You only got a couple here. Look at that on the bottom right side. How challenging? It's very challenging to get these scans, capture that information. So I'm like, okay, just try it. So he tried it, and then he merged our wax up, and it was like that. And we're like, oh, so now it's midnight, okay? It's midnight. We're not in our own labs. We're remoting into our own labs from Kim's office in Bend. And so we're like, okay, let's try this. Like, I have my post-op CT. I've got my healing caps. We used our healing caps here. We merged them with our tissue scan to get the orientation of our tissue scan. And then we took our wax ups and merged it to that. And so what happened is it's 2 a.m. Gaetano and I finally finished the case. I've got a fever. I'm like puking. So I go home. I miss everything. Gaetano gets all the glory. I was super pissed. And then a week passes. And then this is her post-op 1 week later, right? She had no idea that case was almost a disaster. No one knew. No one had any idea. These are pre-op. And then what happened was she started missing all of these follow-ups because like the dentist would call her like, hey, like, why weren't you here today? She's like, oh, I've got a new boyfriend. I'm in Seattle because that's how she looks like now. This is a month ago, and her midline like just slightly to her left, and so here's her before and after. And so Gaetano designed new temps, and this is her with the new temps. I mean, that's a totally different person, right? I mean, that's pretty amazing. And the bite, like this is nice. The bar was set pretty low because of she had pretty bad. Her teeth were bombed out, right? So if we did something a little bit, it's going to make it look way better. But the thing that really impressed me was that the bite required no adjustment, which for me, like a case like this, I tell them, hey, be prepared to reduce 2 or 3 millimeters in the posterior teeth because you can have an anterior open bite because they drop back into CR, but no adjustment, which was okay, like this works. And so this is what I'm doing now. I call it digital conversion version 2. And my need is I have a pre-op scan, CT scan. It's preferred that it's a full arch so I can visualize the condyle. Because what happens is that if they only have anterior teeth and they're used to like posturing forward, right? I can see that on the CT and I can manually move the condyle back. So I can actually remount this case digitally. So that's my pre-op scan. And then at the time of surgery, I need to have a tissue scan with my RadioPig healing caps on there. In terms of the post-op CT, like, look how clear these caps show up. That's pretty amazing, right? And of course, like, it doesn't matter what CT they have, Kodak or chemistry, iCAD, like whatever, like they all come out super nice. And then the last piece of information we need is this. So I no longer scan the OptiSplint in the mouth. Like it doesn't matter. I don't need the scanner in the mouth. It's much more accurate and easier to do it outside the mouth. If it's a case that I'm doing locally, I will scan this on my lab scanner, right? And because this has to be ascended with the flap open, but it doesn't have to be scanned. Because all I'm doing is I'm taking my tissue scan, I'm merging those hearing caps to my CT scan. And then I'm taking my OPTISPLINT and I'm merging that to the healing caps. Right, that's what I'm doing. And so this case here, actually, you were with me with this case in Vancouver, Dr. Marovich. This patient had a C-0 slide. So he was sliding forward, right? But he wanted to be further back. And so what he did was, he's a Dawson guy, so he manually put him into central relation, and he captured a bite registration. And so we took a CT scan with that. Because my CT scan is what I used to merge everything together. So the bite has to be right on. So he did that. And then to show you how quick, so this guy had never done OPTISPLINT ever. And then people said, oh, like, photogrammetry is so much faster. I'm like, no, it's not. Like, this guy had never done it. So I start the timer, okay? And he was just starting. He hasn't even put on the scan caps yet. They're still sitting on the table, and I am standing there with the healing light. So the OPTISPLINT's still on the table, right? So now it's been 8 minutes, and it's done. So, I mean, my argument is that, okay, I've been in ICAM cases, I've been in OPTISPLINT cases, it's almost exactly the same. It doesn't really matter. But the difference is this here, right? The bite. And again, like for these double arch cases, I would say, hey, expect to have posterior interferences and have an anterior open bite. But because we captured that CT, the right orientation, he sits in CR and the bite's just pretty much right on. So for me, this was the last step for me to like really feel like I can master these cases. Is that number one, I've got all my records done in a very efficient amount of time, and I can confidently say, hey, you know, for a double arch case, you're not going to have all these interferences, because when this case is getting ready to go to final, I have much less work to do, right? I already have these designs, which means much less work for me to take these designs and then go to final zirconia. Another quick case here. This was a denture that someone converted, and she was leaving for combo in 2 weeks, of course, right? And so I'm like, okay, we have captured records today. And so I do a smile design at the dentist's office, and she's like, hey, I want longer teeth. I'm going to show less tissue. I'm going to close the embrasure space. And so I show it to her. She's like, yeah, that looks great. And so what we do is we scan the upper temporary in the mouth with the tissue, scan it over, scan the bite. And then what I do, and this is really, really important, and this is what sets this apart from photogrammetry, is that if I have a case that was, let's say it was a lower arch, okay, a lower temporary on the lower arch, if I do a big bone reduction, chances are I'm not going to be captured. I can't capture any tissue when I scan that temporary, right? It's all the floor of the mouth, it's all mandible tissue, very difficult to scan. And so what I do is I do this, is I put our analog scan caps into the integral attempt. I do a 360 scan, because these scan caps have the same geometry as the analog in OPTISPLINT. And so when I take it to exocad, I merge that to that. So now I've got everything I need. Okay, right? I've got this. I've got my temporary 360 scan. I've got my OPTISPLINT in the mouth. I scan it outside the mouth. Finish the case. And then we go to final. So it's a case where, again, like one appointment, I did scan the tissue to make sure I got the tissue. We did do a smile design to verify tooth shape, incisal length, midline, all those things. And so in summary, I'll finish with this, is that if you can identify your central problem, not your opportunity, not the shiny opportunity, find your problems and fix them, that's going to be huge. Number two is you can use scanning, a regular scanner, Trios, iTero, whatever, and then manipulate time, which is the fourth dimension. And then the more you know, the less you hopefully have to do. So those are the slides I have.